Welcome to the Leap to Large. I'm John King at the School of Information at the University of Michigan.
I'm Susan Winter at the College of Information Studies at the University of Maryland.
And I'm Joel Cutcher-Gershenfeld at Brandeis University's Heller School for Social Policy and Management.
And I'm Nick Berente at the University of Notre Dame's Mendoza College of Business.
And as we always do, we've made a short introductory video for today's session, which is focused on human development, people systems. And I'd like to share that with you. And of course, it will be available on the website if it's useful to you in your leadership of large-scale science and engineering projects.
Making the leap from a small scientific project to a large NSF science and engineering initiative is a considerable undertaking. Take scientist Lucy, for example. She does computational chemistry and is making the leap to large. Lucy has identified her key stakeholders and the value propositions that her project offers them. Lucy has also generated impact metrics that match the diverse interests of her key stakeholders. She is now a project leader, and she is now a data leader. As a leader, Lucy needs to attract, retain, and motivate the workforce, what HR professionals call the ARM model. It's not just about matching talent to her project. The NSF expects Lucy to broaden participation in STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. This is important to Lucy. Lucy is planning a 5-year research project, and she needs to attract talent throughout the life of the project. The 5-year horizon gives her time to build pathways for diverse undergraduates, graduate students, and early career faculty into work on her project and in her field. It's an opportunity for diversity that will benefit her science and that of others. Over the life cycle of her project, these pathways need to feed into what is essentially a startup enterprise, continue during multiple years of the project, and launch people into new careers. Once attracted, Lucy needs to retain talent. She needs to make sure that people are trained and paid properly with the conditions that best support them to thrive and grow. To make campus HR a strategic partner, she works with them. She knows her people don't always fit HR categories, and she is proactive in getting them to help her retain underrepresented talent. Inevitably, some people do leave the project. Instead of complaining about turnover by students, staff, and faculty, Lucy knows turnover moves talent. She is glad to see people go on and do great things. Her stakeholders appreciate Lucy's growing the STEM workforce. To motivate those associated with the research enterprise, she knows that research itself is a motivator. However, day-to-day activity can fall short of the excitement of discovery. For her workforce to thrive, Lucy sees the people on her project as key stakeholders and ensure that their interests are understood and met. Those associated with a research enterprise are typically motivated by the science and by challenges in working with complex problems. But day-to-day activity can often fall short. For the workforce to thrive, Lucy needs to think of the people on her project as a stakeholder and be sure that their interests are continually met. As the leader of a large science and engineering project, Lucy must build out the infrastructure that supports today's science and engineering workforce and sets the stage for tomorrow. This is important and difficult work. In the long run, workforce development might have as much social impact as the science itself. So let's focus on being a workforce leader for large science and engineering projects.
So again, we're delighted to share with you that video. It really is something that you can use for your own purposes. And we're delighted to welcome you to the session. Susan.
Yeah, just as an overview, this is the 6th of 7 sessions. And today we're going to talk about workforce development. Next slide. So just following much the same pattern we've had before, the welcome and overview with the video, pre-session survey results, talk about pathways for broadening participation, about teamwork, and about embracing the diaspora as people move from your lab to other endeavors. And do a little poll, because you guys like that. We have a keynote from Julia Lane. And today we're going to play a bargaining game. So that should be exciting. And then we'll do a little prep for the last session.
Thanks, Susan. And very briefly, we heard back, it says 145, it's actually now up to 154 of you. And we appreciate your responses to the survey. We're going to keep the survey open. We said this is the last pre-session survey, and it is, but there are some questions for session 7 in the survey. So if you haven't filled it out, of course, we'd encourage you to do so. Just as a reminder, you do represent, as survey respondents, the sweet spot, people who have led 3 to 5 or 1 to 2 smalls or mediums, but very few of you have led more than 1 or 2, most of you know, larges. And so you're ready to make the leap to large. And quite a few of you were at the session 5. Those of you that weren't, many of you said you'll be watching at the hub. And quite a few of you, in fact, have watched recordings from the earlier sessions, which we appreciate. In your feedback last time, you really liked the practical guidelines on how to do data management plans, as well as the new thinking on data leadership. You enjoyed the keynote and to a slightly lesser degree, the panel discussion. A few of you highlighted the poll responses, but we saw some positive responses in the survey. But that really brings us to the presentation portion of today's workshop. I'm going to lead it off with a little bit just about workforce development, focusing on pathways for broadening participation. And as you may recall, we've said that really you have a fourfold responsibility. Of course, advancing science and engineering, but it includes workforce, includes economic impacts and innovation impacts. The focus today is on workforce, but as you'll see, it actually touches all other impacts as well. I'll start with the quote from the current director of the NSF, Dr. Panchanathan, who says that there's a need for a diverse and a robust STEM workforce. This is not new, but in particular, the NSF director highlights the need for a globally engaged, diverse STEM workforce, connecting research with education and capacity building, broadening participation, and also when they talk about workforce, the NSF is looking at reviewers and panelists to contribute to the community-led evaluation of research proposals. We asked you in the survey your experience with attracting and retaining underrepresented folks, and essentially almost all of you said with a mean of 8.5 on a scale from 0 to 10 that attracting people as part of your research team from underrepresented groups was important. There are some bright spots with some of you saying it's also not hard, but most of you with a mean of 3.8 on a scale from 0 to 10, with lower scores meaning harder, said that in fact it was hard to do. What's interesting is we said, what about broader pathways to help underrepresented groups enter your field? And you said that was even more important and even harder to do. And in a sense, our job today is to help you in that journey. I'll start with a quote from Mel King. He, years ago, when Boston was considering its first cable TV channel, had the radical suggestion that the community should be able to come in and use the TV studios. People were horrified, and he famously said, the rear wheels of the train won't catch the front wheels unless something dramatic happens. And he actually invented community access TV. He's also the founder of the first Fab Lab, along with my brother Neil, which we'll talk about in a minute. But in a sense, what does it take for something dramatic to happen? Let's start with attract. The NSF Includes report has recently come out, and it has a vision of broadening participation in a variety of ways. I've listed here, I won't go through all of them, things that are actually in the report as things that are recommended for ways to attract diverse talent to, in this case, your large proposal. And needless to say, this is not a pick one, but likely all of these or some combination of them would be candidates to include in your proposal as more than just well, we'll do some public presentations and set up a website. That's useful, but the NSF is highlighting many other things that you can do by way of outreach. And not only that, but the national academies have focused in on the minority serving institutions. Nick will tell you, having been at a flag, and myself as well, at a land grant flagship, those institutions also account for the diverse national workforce in large numbers. But here's the thing. Not only do you want to attract folks from underrepresented groups, but you want to retain and motivate them. Of course, that comes with intellectual challenge and meaningful work and mentoring. It also comes with mitigating the harm, whether by race or gender or LGBT or other categories, that people can experience when they don't feel welcomed, when they face various forms of behaviors that in fact lead them to walk away from a science career. So the work is in your proposal is to think about what can you say about the kind of environment that you'll create that will not just attract, but retain and motivate talent. And you may recall from a few sessions ago, we said the sweet spot was what you do that others don't do that serves the needs of others. So of course you want to do things that are recommended, but you want to think creatively, think out of the box about how your proposal will stand out compared to others who may be proposing some similar things. And I'll give you just a specific example. On the upper right is a picture of, it happens to be a fab lab in Iceland. There's now 2,000 of them in the world. And I was involved volunteering in the very first fab lab with Mel King. And the picture you see in the bottom left, I took in 2003. And a few years ago, I learned that this, then a girl, is now in school studying engineering. And when you talk about broader impacts, creating an environment that will bring in next generation talent is part of the story. But another part of the story, I'm just going to show you very briefly a 1-minute video on the Fab Academy. This was an NSF large that spun off the idea of an educational arm that has now gone global. This is a slightly older video when there were just 600 Fab Labs, but it's essentially a story of making the leap to large in ways that go beyond just what you might do in a proposal. So let me, if you'll forgive me for 1 second, get you to the little video clip of one form of broader impacts that can happen with a leap to large.
This is Fab Academy, a course that's not like any other course. It's a life-changing experience where the goal is to fail as fast as possible, as much as you can, in the 20 weeks of intensive roller coaster emotions, of ups and downs, in a safe-to-fail environment so that you can succeed in tomorrow's world. Taught and directed by MIT professor Neil Gershenfeld and run by a distributed global staff. You can learn digital fabrication technologies such as 3D printing, laser cutting, how to make your own network of sensors, programming, and soft skills like critical thinking, problem solving, adaptability, and design thinking. This is how to learn how to make almost anything. If you are a person who wants to improve their career, Fab Academy can flip the game. There are more than 70 locations around the world. Pick one today and connect with a multicultural network of innovators, of amazing people with incredible skills. Build your future today in Fab Academy.
And needless to say, Neil started this work as a physicist interested in the physics of digital fabrication. And in fact, it's now become an entire enterprise in its own right, achieving broader impacts. So that's just a little bit about broader impacts. The final thing that I'll share with you is that with these diverse perspectives comes new ideas in the science itself. We focus on pathways, not pipelines. Pipelines have the notion that once you get in, you can't move in and out. And instead, you want multiple pathways to bring in new talent. And the phrase that we hear these days is nothing about us without us. This involves new partners who can have voice, and the combination of new ideas, new talent, and new partners brings us to broadener participation. So that's just a little bit on broadening impacts. But in our surveys, you also wanted to learn about teamwork in the context of this. And so I'm going to hand it to Susan.
Thank you, Joel. Yeah, we got some interesting results when we asked you about challenges in terms of teamwork. There were a couple of aspects that you found to be particularly challenging, one of which was fostering a problem-solving culture among members, and another was resolving conflict among team members. So both of those were considered important, but also challenging. And by the way, as I have noted in my years in this field, although the video we showed you says that, a large is 5 years, and so you will have 5 years to do workforce development. In my experience, you may actually be working with members of your team for 10 or even 20 years. So teamwork actually has lasting importance over time. And as a leader, it's important to approach these challenges and the challenges of fostering alternative pathways the same way that you approach doing your research. So I would encourage you to think about, what does a research project focused on improving teamwork and broadening participation look like? What are your hypotheses about the causes? What will you do differently? How will you know if it worked? And so one way of thinking about levers for team composition, if you think that the composition of the team, who's on it, is one of the important factors in terms of conflict and actually problem solving, is to think about the fact that conflict can arise when you have different kinds of people on a team. The challenge is that we also know that effective teams have different kinds of people. If you only have the same kind of person, it's not an effective team. Decades of research has said that if you have members of a team working together, there will be some members that will focus on getting the task done, and some that will focus on the socio-emotional and making sure that people are feeling good, that they're heard, that they feel that they're included. And you need both of them to be effective. If you have all task-focused teams, then people feel bad and they leave the team and they don't want to keep working in it. If you have only socio-emotional focused team members, then the work doesn't get done. But the task-focused and the socio-emotional focused team members are likely to come into conflict with each other because they're trying to accomplish different things. So can you have that conversation with your team about who's filling what kinds of roles and what kind of focus? More recently, we're seeing the literature talk about different roles, like every project needs an evangelist who looks at possibilities, creates compelling stories, motivates, excites, injects a lot of energy, but also a manager who allows you to move toward closure and completion. I've actually heard this talked about as the chaos Muppet versus order Muppet theory, where the cookie monster injects a lot of chaos and everyone gets cookies, and that's pretty exciting and motivating. But you got to have Bert come in there and actually move the action forward. So recognizing as a team who's playing which role, and that you need both kinds of people in order to be effective, and building a team where both kinds of people are valued and you respect them for what they're bringing to the party is enormously important. Why is this important? If you don't cultivate diversity of thought, then, as Mark Twain said, it ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. There's a problem of groupthink that for situational awareness, for creativity, you need to have people who are thinking about what you don't know. This is something that came to light with the Bay of Pigs disaster in the 60s. We're having conversations about this with the invasion of Iraq. And we've known this for a long time. We've known that it's very hard. We've had, since the 1950s, studies on social conformity. There's a desire for cohesiveness and harmony. Solomon Asch actually had a series of studies saying if you just asked people to match the line on the left with the one on the right, they were right over 99% of the time. But if you put them in a group and the rest of the group gave the wrong answer, you could get them down to 63% correct. They would change their opinion to match the group. This is exacerbated by power imbalances like the ones you will have on your team. Full professors versus undergraduate students. It's very difficult not to have the full professors dominate. So you must work to create a culture where different views are sought and valued and where it's safe to speak up. Next slide. Apologies to Mark Twain, but it's not just what you know that ain't so, it's also what you don't know. We have blind spots, and if you have only people like you, then you're not gonna know what you don't know. Homophily is a very strong tendency. We tend to associate with people who are like us. It makes bonding easier, it makes communication more efficient, but you also create self-confirming echo chambers. And we'll talk more about this next week when we talk about collaboration across disciplines. So what do you need to do? You need to expand what you know. You need to expand who you know. You need more diverse networks. They're better at spreading information. They're better at creating innovation. The strength of weak ties has been known for quite a while now for novel information flow. You need to start doing something different. So thinking about what you're going to do differently and then figuring out whether that was effective. And if not, what's the next thing you're going to do differently is going to be critical in terms of improving teamwork. And now to John to talk a little bit about the diaspora.
Thanks, Susan. We have repeatedly said in these sessions that you have to be sure that it gets done, but you don't have to do everything yourself. So if you're going to run a large, you want to cultivate organizational HR expertise. You need to have those people ready so you can turn to them at any time and ask their opinion. The rule of thumb to follow in this is actually quite simple. If a stakeholder is going to be rewarded or sanctioned, you need to talk to HR. We haven't spent a lot of time on innovation, so we're going to kind of turn to innovation as one of the key elements in embracing the diaspora. This is a mindset issue. Just when people get good, they get hired away. How is that a help? Okay, so in the 1960s, there was an emphasis in the communication field on the communication of innovation. And that led to something called the diffusion of innovation theory, which has turned out to be pretty robust. Basically, what you're trying to do in diffusion of innovation theory is not only capitalize on in situ innovation, that is, people who are innovative where they are. When innovators leave, they take innovation with them, and that spreads innovation around. Next slide. We have a free labor market. Maybe not completely free, but free-ish. It's a trade-off. The trade-off is between social welfare, the society benefits from innovation, moving around, but it does impose local costs. If you think of your workers as stakeholders because they can move, they have volition, and their potential employers are stakeholders, you need to be thinking about how to get people what they want. Next slide. Many people think that Silicon Valley is an example of an innovative culture. Well, arguably it is. A lot of the tech industry has come from there. And innovative cultures, they encourage attrition. That is, they encourage people to move. And one of the ways they do this is they don't depend on non-disclosure agreements, and they don't depend on non-compete agreements. Next slide. You've seen this picture before, the change from the old open to the new open. This is actually tied to innovation. With results and tools and data becoming more open, people get better ready to innovate. So these things are tied together. We've been doing this for a long time. This thing we call school is kind of designed to get people ready to innovate. Next slide. Learning is moving closer to home. People are starting to do lifelong learning. Next slide. Learning is also moving out of institutional contexts. For example, Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia, has grown like Topsy. It's all around us now. It's available on the internet. YouTube, next slide, is the 1.3 billion videos. If you want to learn something, it's probably on YouTube. Citizen science, it's growing. This is a form of broadening participation. This is a crucial thing. Next slide. So the takeaways in green are the relatively free labor market works for you. That's what you want to strive for. That's the mindset. And an innovative society is a broader impact of your research. And there's no stopping any of this. It's moving forward. And with that, we're going to turn to Nick, and he's going to give us an example of Diaspora.
Yeah, so thanks, John. One thing we did with NCSA, and NCSA is the Supercomputer Center at Illinois, National Center for Supercomputing Applications. And it's a big center that's been around since, I guess, the 80s. And one of the things we did, and this was a pilot project, so this didn't hit all of their diaspora, but we realized that, NCSA has this disproportionately, I guess, interesting impact on the internet and internet startups and a lot of tech companies. So one of the things we were doing, communicating to the state of Illinois, was, hey, look at the diaspora. And if you look at and this is just a visualization of where people went from NCSA, and clearly a lot went to California, you see by the big arrow. But if you look at the right, I forget what kind of chart we call that, but all the gray means that they stayed in Illinois. So really one of the big things is they were talking to state legislators, they're really upskilling. The center is really upskilling the state of Illinois and their capabilities in handling, next generation computational advancements. This particular visualization, and then of course we came up with some other visualizations as well, which industries people went into, and certainly a lot went into academia, but a lot went other places as well. And there were a number of startups, and then we unpacked the commercial. Which large corporations did people go to? And you can see there that Caterpillar's a big local company, but there are a lot of other organizations as well that they went to. And what this exercise was doing, remember we talked about communicating your value to your stakeholders. This was a key stakeholder. We were communicating the value. It wasn't necessarily a science case, and it wasn't necessarily a metric in the sense of, we had a target and a number that we wanted to reach, but they were nice visualizations that told the story and told the story to the specific stakeholders. So that's what we mean when we say the diaspora. And really, when you look at it, a large scale science enterprise, as the video said, sometimes the workforce implications are just as important as the scientific implications. And too often we see organizations, lamenting the fact that they're losing these wonderful people. Instead, we should be celebrating the fact that we're graduating these wonderful people, the same as we do with our students, and find a nice path for educating the next generation and doing it again. So with that said, we have everyone's favorite, well, maybe not everyone's favorite, but we have our poll questions. And you'll see a poll pop up. The first poll question today is, it is important to take a broadening participation in underrepresented communities even more seriously for large projects. The following are good ideas, which is the most consistent with strengthening the pathways approach? Option A, include a co-PI from a historically Black college to plan and support courses at that university. B, describe how we will recruit grad students from the PhD project, which serves Black and Latin students. C, develop a curriculum for teachers in lower income schools in major cities intended to garner K through 12 student and parent interest in the STEM field, or D, make every effort to include co-PIs from underrepresented communities.
So we have just over 100 responses in. There's more coming in. We're now close to 150. We're getting closer to 200. So I think the results are now becoming quite clear. So I'm going to share the results.
Yeah, so being the good students that you are, you got that one right? Of course, they're all good ideas, but the pathways idea that Joel mentioned was really, you want to distinguish and differentiate what you're doing, and these are long-term projects. Oftentimes, and Joel mentioned the student who was doing something in a fab lab, the young lady, when she was a little kid, she was in the fab lab. Now she's an engineering student at a major university, right? That's the level when you're starting to think about pathways. You think about pathways outside of the academic enterprise. Many of the other options were about broadening participation to those already in the academic enterprise. This is a way to establish pathways outside.
Okay, we're on to the next one.
So the second question, which of the following is not consistent with the Diaspora approach to thinking about your highly skilled workforce? Point out to stakeholders that you're upskilling the cutting edge of the workforce and celebrate placements through KPIs and visualizations. Second one is the scope of the large project. In the scope of the large project, create an explicit training program to provide students with the skills necessary to contribute to the project. Third one, keep fighting internally in your organization to get careers of research scientists and others funded on soft money to be better recognized and paid to avoid losing everyone to industry. Or D, the final one, arming the administration of your institution with a story they can tell the policymakers about the value of your science enterprise.
And again, we've got over 100 responses in. The responses are still coming, but I think the results are abundantly clear. So I'm going to end the poll so you can see the results.
Again, our wonderful students, yes, this is a good thing to do, to keep fighting in your organization, but that's not necessarily consistent with the Diaspora approach. All of the others are key elements of the Diaspora approach to workforce.
And our final question.
And here's a quick point that Susan briefly touched on. How should we have regular team meetings on a large-scale science and engineering practice? Should we do it weekly? Or should we meet only when we have something to meet about? Or some regular cadence, but not necessarily weekly? Or should we have team meetings weekly, but overhaul project meetings once a month? Which do you think is the best?
Wow, this is turning out to be a horse race. So we have over 200 responses in, and I do think we're ready to see some results.
Ooh, it is a horse race. The bottom line is weekly is usually what people do. So don't do that automatically. And I'm glad to see that you have neither the first two, which are bad. The second two are probably both fine, but I think the regular cadence, but not necessarily weekly, is the way to think about this, and to think about different, and this is also a teaser for next week, where we will talk a little bit more about coordination across communities. So the poll questions today, main ideas were pathways thinking, Diaspora thinking, and then lay a little seed for next week in coordination. And with that said, it's now time to introduce our guest speaker. So our guest speaker, our keynote speaker today, is Julia Lane. She's a professor at the NYU Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. She is a senior advisor in the office of the federal CIO at the White House, supporting the federal data strategy. She co-founded the Coleridge Initiative, whose goal it is to transform the way governments access and use data for the social good. Previously, Dr. Lane was Senior Managing Economist and Institute Fellow at American Institutes for Research. She held positions at NSF, the Urban Institute, the World Bank, American University, University of Chicago. In these positions, Julia had led many initiatives, including co-founding the Institute for Research and Innovation Science, IRIS, at the University of Michigan, and the STAR Metrics program at NSF. She also established the Patents View project at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Dr. Lane is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, as well as the International Statistical Institute and the American Statistical Association. She's the recipient of the 2014 Julius Shishkin Award, the 2014 Roger Harriot Award, the 2017 Warren E. Miller Award, among other distinctions. She's truly a leader in research in so many areas of the scientific enterprise. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Julia Lane as our keynote speaker for this session.
Oh, thank you very much. Make me very embarrassed when you go through all that, because I always feel like it's someone else who did all those things. So anyway, I'm delighted to be here and see so many old friends in the organizing group. So hi again. So this was a slide from last week, I think, and I just beg your pardon?
Earlier today.
Oh, from earlier today, I'm sorry. So I want to harken back to this set of ideas and build on them, which is this notion of one of the things that NSF is trying to do is to build out that workforce and integrate it with education building capacities. If I could go to the next slide. So I'm a labor economist by training. So obviously what I'm interested in doing is figuring out, well, like any scientist, what you're interested in doing is, rather than working from ad hoc stories about the impact of scientific research and investments in the workforce, is figuring out what's the evidence basis behind that. So I've spent when I went to NSF to do the science of science policy in 2008, the unfortunate fact was that the points that the Vannevar Bush pointed out in the establishment of NSF had really not changed by 2008. For 57 years, we still didn't have a good scientific evidence basis for figuring out what the impact of our investments in research were. And the issue is that simply looking at patents and publications is not really, as we've just discussed in the past half hour, that's not the way in which a large portion of the impact happens. So if you'd go to the next slide. And in fact, Paul Romer, who got the 2018 Nobel Prize in economics, got it very much for the argument that what the NSF is doing and what you are doing largely with your infrastructure investments is stimulating innovation and the transmission of knowledge through the movement of human beings. So he built this theoretical basis, this notion of endogenous technological change, that technological change isn't just a set of random events that happens. You can stimulate technological change by investing in human beings, investing in the interaction of human beings for technology. So if you want to go back and take a look at his work, or just take a look at the seminal ideas that came out of that, you could go onto the Nobel website, and so you see the theoretical framework. Now, when I met Paul, it was when I was building star metrics and new metrics. And the argument that I made when I was at NSF is that when you try and look at the impact of funding on scientific outcomes, you need to look at the role of people, exactly what this meeting is about. There's not this magic line between funding and output. It's the interaction of people and institutions that generates ideas. So how do we build that data infrastructure that enables us to provide a scientific basis for understanding that transmission? Next slide. So essentially, the idea here is you want to measure people who are funded to do research. You can capture that from the HR and finance records in your institution. Every month, everyone who gets paid on a research grant, that gets automatically captured. All the vendor purchases get captured. It gets charged to a grant code. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to make up numbers and try and look back at your Excel spreadsheets as to who you've hired. You can capture that automatically, and then you can trace them. Oppenheimer's great line is the best way to send knowledge is to wrap it up in a human being. And that is amplified by when you take a look at the economic growth that is gathered around universities in different states. If ideas were transmitted by patents and publications, there would be zero geographic impact because there's zero geographic placement. So what you want to do is you want to use data. You've got data on the people. Now we want to trace them through to the startup of businesses and through the social networks. So take the HR finance data, next slide. And you could go and take a look at my Nature. Go back, you missed the, if you want to go back, this was the piece I wrote about making science metrics more scientific. By that I meant, let's have a conceptual framework and then build an empirical framework around it. Next slide. So if you go on to IRIS at the University of Michigan, they actually now have data from, I think, 90 campuses and expanding on 450,000 federally funded awards, covering about 50% of federally funded university research. It's beautifully documented and has about 250 researchers working at it. Since I'm an academic, I'm going to highlight my work, but if you want to go and take a look at their website, you're going to see all the work that has been done by a wide range of researchers. Next slide. And this is some example actually from work that I didn't do, but you can also send postdocs in and they have scholars who come in and do work with the data to look at the impact of their institute. Nicholas talked about NCSA, the CTSAs at NIH have been doing a lot of work as well. Next slide. There's also summary information. So in addition to doing the types of work that Nicholas did for NCSA, you can automatically generate from every university where the people went, because you've got the universe of all people who worked in all grants at each one of the participating universities. You can match that to Census Bureau data, which was one of the projects I developed at the Census Bureau. So you've got universe data at the Census Bureau and actually from states on all jobs for all workers in all firms in all states with their earnings. So you don't have to do a trace study in which you only get responses from a subset of people. Nicholas is nodding his head. You get universe information. So I'm going to show you the results of that. So you can look at this. So this is a book chapter that we did for National Bureau of Economic Research. So there are a couple of ways in which your impact has an effect. And you heard Nicholas set me up. He didn't know he was doing it. Many of them went to Microsoft. So can we look at the impact of that tracement of people? You've got also at the Census Bureau universe data on all businesses, including all startups. So you can look at the flows of people out of research grants through the U-metrics data. You can see how many of them go to high-tech industries. You can look at the startup worker firms, and then you can look at the impact. Next slide. And so you can then compare the survival and growth rate of the firms in which U-metrics workers went versus the ones that they didn't look at. You can look at their R&D and their growth. I'm not going to go through in any detail, buy the book. Next slide. And then the other thing you can see that the differences in the outcomes, and obviously it's quite clearly strong and positive. This is a piece. No, wait a minute, Joel. You could go to the science piece that we did, and you can also look at the earnings and employment outcomes of PhD recipients. You look at the graduates, and then you take a look at their earnings and employment outcomes. Next again. And you can see what happened, what types of firms they go to, not just startups. Next slide. And you can look at their Next slide. See what happens when I chastise you. You get very frightened of me, even though we're not in the same room. You can look at their earnings distributions by field and by degree over time. So again, this isn't anecdotal. This is generated from universe financial records and HR records and universe census data. So, and you can generate this at basically zero cost because the linkages have already been done. Next slide. So what can you do? So you can think as your outcome measures for your next set of reports to NSF, as well as your the patents and publications, also think, as has just been highlighted, where did your graduate students and postdocs get jobs? Where are the business startups? Now, if you're doing a large scale research program, there are disclosure proofing issues, but you should be able to generate that information, particularly if you go and work at the IRIS BDE, Virtual Data Enclave. We're also building links to the U-metrics data to the Survey of Earned Doctorates and the Survey of Doctoral Recipients. The Survey of Earned Doctorates is a census of all data on doctoral students, and you can also see time to degree and the relationship between the degree, the research project that you did, and the field of their degree from the SED. We've got some of this information as shameless self-promotion here, but Joel, I hope you, Paul Romer is opening that keynote. We've got a bunch of people from NCSES and other places where you can trace that a little bit more. So thank you very much, Joel. I hope I made it under time.
You did well, and we actually have at least 5 minutes for some audience questions. We'll run this kind of as a town hall. Nick and Susan will serve up any questions that people post in the Q&A or the chat, and we might have time for at least 1 or 2 questions.
I pride myself on being docile and obedient, Joel.
And if I may, while we're getting the questions going, I know that there are tons of materials, and I came across your work after we did the stuff with NCSA, right? So, and clearly you, as you mentioned, it's the entire universe. But because it's the entire universe, I guess I'm wondering if I'm someone who hasn't gotten a large project funded before, and I want to think about how am I going to communicate and manage my the project, the Diaspora, the workflow pathways of workforce pathways of my project. What's the specific steps? What are the specific steps you would recommend for me to think about this and think about communicating this?
So for the NCSA, so the CTSAs, for example, the NIH has run, IRIS has been doing a lot of work with the CTSAs to document the impact. So they have combined with all the CTSAs, and then you can compare your performance in your CTSA with the performance of everyone else. You can't share your individual level of information because of disclosure proofing, but you can write down your theory of change, right? So you say, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Here are the measures of success that I'm interested in. It might be time to degree for doctoral students. It might be how many doctoral students or how many people I work with end up doing research in my field. It might be placement in a firm or whatever it is. Writing down what it is that you want to achieve is kind of the first step. You know, what you measure is what you get. You can't do everything. So write that down in advance, and then you can look at the data to see whether or not you've achieved the goals.
So at the proposal level, you're suggesting that we actually list some goals, and then that way it's better we'll work toward those goals throughout the project, but also be more readily evaluate them afterwards.
So there's 2 parts to that. That's exactly right. So treat this as a science. So you write down a hypothesis and you figure out what the data and the measures are associated with it. But the advantage of having the U-metrics data is you can, what we do in economics is you try and identify an appropriate comparison group. And so you now, rather than saying in the void, well, I got X, well, X doesn't mean anything, right? You want to be able to compare it to a reasonable comparison group. And, you know, if you're going off the rails early on, you can kind of adapt and change. So there's a bunch of different ways of constructing appropriate comparison groups, because obviously we don't have white mice here. You know, unfortunately, it'd be nice to turn the little graduate students into little white mice and apply a treatment, but you can control for lots of confounding factors when you've got data as rich and complicated as we have.
So we have a number of questions, and so maybe we can go through them fairly quickly. One is, how do large compare to small in your metrics? Have you done any comparisons there? Any insights?
Large institute
projects and smaller projects. So if you think a few $100,000 NSF funded project versus a few $1 million.
We have not. Part of the issue has been there are thousands of research questions. That's a very good one. And of course, it depends on what outcome measures you're interested in, right? So you've got to calibrate that. I'd strongly encourage you. This is a really important and interesting new data set because it varies by individual, by time, by lab, by network, by field, and all the data are so complex that you can slice and dice it by different metrics. So I would encourage you to go off and ask that question and get a publication out of it.
There you
There's
go.
a lot of publications coming out of this work right now.
And there are some questions about the data set. One asks, and I'll ask a follow-on to this. It says, how complete is the data set in IRIS? And the specific question this one had is, what fraction of doctoral students does it include? But I'll add to that, right? Can we all go at the data set? Is there any limitation from use?
So if your university is a member institution, faculty and graduate students at member institutions can work with the UMetrics data at no charge. Non-member institutions, there is a seat fee, so you can get in touch with the IRIS to find out what that is. I don't remember off the top of my head. We have a revise and resubmit for Nature, and so they've asked us this very question about how representative is the data, and it turns out, so we've been slicing and dicing it many different ways. So it's clearly, so representative is only defined relative to the question that you're asking. So, you know, if you ask if something's representative, that means nothing, and they should say representative of what? There is no reason to assume that the structure of the way in which science is done varies from institution for institution. It presumably varies from field to field, but there may be differences between the way it's done in an R1 institution versus an R2 institution because of the investments in infrastructure. But we can't, when you look at networks and individuals for the R1s, it looks pretty good. We are working very closely with HBCUs and HSIs. We've got the Gates Foundation funded us to offer training classes for HBCUs, and so we're adding them in and to understand how that process works, very much along the lines that you were talking about before, Joel. How representative is it of SED, of doctoral students in general? Well, we're capturing about 50% of doctoral students in our SED to UMetrics match.
Ooh, okay.
Well, between 40 and 50%, the head count depends on how you measure it, right? But obviously, we have most of the big institutions. We don't have a lot of the smaller institutions, so it's a skewed tail. It would be great to have as many universities as possible join up with IRIS, because obviously the more institutions that join, the bigger picture we have of the entire research enterprise rather than just the R1.
Yep, I think we're running up against time, so.
And I'll put Jason Owen Smith's email in the chat, and so please go ahead and email him and say, and blame me.
Yes, well, Julia, please, thank you very much for for joining us here today. And if you could stick
Thank you
on
so
it,
much for inviting me. I'm very happy to see old friends as well.
well, it was our pleasure. So Joel, I
And,
guess.
and we're having a virtual round of applause. We wish we could.
Yay!
Thank you so
I'm an
much.
economist. Applause doesn't get me anything. Send money, damn it.
we will take that to heart. And that brings us to our concluding activity for the day. This is an experiment. It's an experiment that's designed to be of potential value to you. We're introducing you to what we call the stakeholder bargaining game. It's a simulation that's designed to illustrate the dynamics of communication, competition, and collaboration. It's designed to be fun, although fun with a point. And it addresses issues around workforce and teamwork in a very abstract way. And it will also set the stage for next week's class session workshop on bridging across fields and disciplines. The underlying logic of the simulation is actually a long-standing exercise. We've used it in training for years, but we've converted it to be used virtually for this workshop. And I want to make clear that if you find it instructive and helpful, it's even more powerful when done within a research team to surface and lift up issues for dialogue and discussion. If you're interested in having access to this, I have an instructor's guide. And if you email me, I can certainly arrange for you to have access to it. But right now, it's your chance to play the game. The rules of the game are as follows. The object is to bargain for as much as you can. In the game, you'll be randomly assigned to one of 4 teams that together represent a cluster. Each team has 2 or 3 people on it. And so each cluster has about 12 people. And so we'll have about 15 or 16 clusters going in parallel. The gameplay has 5 rounds of play. And the first 2 rounds feature bargaining just within your team. So you and 1 or 2 others need to reach an agreement. You'll see it's a very simple agreement. You just have to agree on whether to adopt the word strong or the word open. You can vote for either word. And by themselves, of course, they're just words, but we're going to give them some meaning. And that's the heart of the game. Just to understand the logistics on the computer, you will not see, of course, the other people in your cluster or even just within your 2 or 3 person team, but you'll be assigned to them. And in a minute, I'll show you how you can communicate with them. If there's just 2 of you and you can't agree, then the computer will do a random assignment of whether you chose the word open or the word strong. But here's the key thing. You are making a choice with 1 or 2 others in each round. There are 3 other teams that are also working in parallel with the same instructions, making the same choice, but you won't know their choice until all 4 choices are recorded. So you will be surprised. It could be that you make your choice, and let's say you went strong. If all the other 3 groups went strong, all 4 of you would lose 100,000 hypothetical dollars. On the other hand, if there are 3 strongs, they would each win 100,000 hypothetical dollars, and the one open would lose 300,000. If it's 2 and 2, the 2 strongs win 200,000, the 2 opens lose 200,000. If there's 1 strong, that 1 strong wins 300,000, and the 3 opens each lose 100,000. And if all 4 vote open, they all win 100,000. So that's the simple payoff structure. There's 5 possible scenarios. Your job, you and your partner or partners, if there's 2 or 3 of you on your team, have to make the decision of what you think you should do, also taking into account what you think the other 3 teams will do, and then we'll get kind of a surprise each round to see what the results are. So I'm going to ask Menon, if she would, to put this link in chat, because while I'm presenting, I can't see the chat. But basically, in a few minutes, we're going to have you go to the WM Align. We're not maligning anybody, but the WM Align link that you see here. It's going to be pasted in chat. And you'll then navigate to the stakeholder bargaining game. You'll have the chance to log in. There's 3 ways to sign in. You can, if you have a Gmail account, you can just type that in and that will sign you in. If you want to use a different account than Gmail, you can, but then it will ask you for a password. You still can do that. You also have the choice to sign in as anonymous. The one thing is that if you lose your internet connection or exit, if you come back, you can't rejoin as the person you were because it won't recognize you. So, but you have 3 choices. You can sign in either way. And then there's what's called a join code. And I'll give you that to you in a minute. And then you'll click on play and we'll start the game. And so that's basically how it looks. When you actually come to the interface, this is what you're going to find. You're going to find, first of all, it'll tell you which team member you are and which team you're on. The teams are lettered A, B, C, and D. At the very top, you might be in groups, game 1, game 2, game 3. We might have, as I said, as many as 15 or more of them. So remember your game number, because when we report the results overall, we'll see which game you were on. And remember that if there's a disagreement, the computer's going to do a random assignment. So that's going to be important. But here's the point. In the middle here, you make a selection in each round of whether you're voting strong or open. And then on the right, you'll actually see what the votes were, which will tell you whether you won or lost money in the round. In the upper right, you'll see your score. And by the way, you can click on that to see the payoff matrix if you want to, again, be reminded of the rules of the game. And I do urge you to think about the rules of the game. And then here's the key thing. In rounds 1 and 2 on the bottom left, you can just communicate with your team. We want you to establish your ability as a team to communicate with each other. There's a message there where you can send messages back and forth to the other 1 or 2 people on your team. If you choose to, you can exchange phone numbers and actually just talk. That's probably easier if you're willing to do so, but it's not expected. It's an option. Starting in round 3, 4, and 5, you'll be able to communicate with individual teams or with all teams. So those are options that will show up starting in round 3. But that's essentially the way the game is set up. So what I'm going to do is stop the screen share. At this point, you should all navigate to the link. Manon, do we have that in chat?
Yep.
Okay. And once you navigate, you can hit join, and you'll ask you for your code, your join code, and the code is 112, 112. And so once you join, and I see some of you are already joining, which is great, you're going to be randomly assigned to a variety of teams. And I'm going to just pause for a minute because I want to give as many chances for people to join as possible. And again, this is a simulation. I'll be talking to you throughout it. But at this point, we've got, it looks like almost 100 people have joined. And we have more folks joining as we're speaking. I'm just going to pause for a few more minutes. And again, you're putting in the join code of 112, 112. And it looks like we now have 114 people who have joined. Some more of you are joining as well. We have a total of 40 teams that have formed. You don't yet know who's on your team, but, and we're up to about 122 people are now joined. Again, I'm going to give it another minute or two. Maybe while you're joining, we'll have some music to play. So hopefully that was enough. We're at 130 people joined, and I think it's time to start the game. So welcome aboard to all of you. I'm going to now start the game, and we're going to start in round one. And the clock is starting now. So at this point, you have 3 minutes during which you can communicate with the 1 or 2 other people on your team. And at this point, you can see if you can agree in round one on just a simple choice. Should you vote strong or should you vote open? And that will determine what the payoff is based not only on your vote, but on that of the other 3 teams in your cluster. So again, we're in round one. You have just 2 minutes left. And at this point, you should be sending messages. If you choose to share phone numbers, you can actually be talking live. But if not, you can use the message board to send messages back and forth. And again, in the upper right-hand corner, if you want to see the payoff matrix again, you can look at it there to see what the rules of the game are setting forth in terms of whether your choice should be strong or open. We'll give you a little bit of Jeopardy music while you do this. And we'll come back to the game. And there's just a minute, 20 seconds left. I'm assuming that you're sending messages back and forth, and hopefully you've reached agreement. By the way, you need to select your choice, and then there's another thing to click on to make it your official choice. So make sure that you see that and you post your official choice. You have literally 1 minute left to make your choice in round one of the game. And the clock is ticking. There's just 45 seconds left. This is a time for you to get to know the other person. You need to have good communications with them in order to continue to communicate throughout the game. There's just 30 seconds left in round one of the bargaining game. And if you're not sure about this, when you see the results, it'll be a little bit more clear how this all works. Just 10 seconds left. So that completes round one, and we're now going to see your scores. And it looks like we have some teams that had people that voted strong, some that voted open. Some of you won money, some of you lost. I'm going to move us on to round two, and the clock is now starting on round two. Now that you've got some more data, you have 3 minutes to make your choice. Once again, you can communicate with your partner or partners. There might be 2 of you, there might be 3 of you, but either way, this is your chance to decide now that you have some data based on what happened in round one. Remember, the goal of the game is to win as much as you can, and you'll have a chance to bargain first within the team now. And I'll give you a heads up, starting in round 3, you're going to have a chance to bargain with the other 3 teams in your cluster. But you have just 2 minutes and 20 seconds left. You have data and you want to think strategically. This is about, can you bridge across and can you communicate effectively? Right now, you're communicating with the choice that you're making. And of course, in round 3, you'll have the chance to communicate directly with the other teams in your cluster. So once again, less than 2 minutes to make your choices in round 2 of the bargaining game. Use your time wisely. You might not just make choices about your vote, but be thinking strategically about how you want to approach the negotiations in round 3. And so if you have settled on your vote, continue to communicate with what you think you should be doing in the next round of the game. We'll give you a little music as well. So needless to say, there's a minute left, and every minute is precious time to think through this game. If you wanted to exchange phone numbers and communicate that way, it will be more effective for the later rounds of the game. But if not, you can use the message board and communicate as well. So we have just 45 seconds left. The clock is ticking to settle on your vote. Let's now see what you do and what you think the others will do that will determine the outcome of round 2 of the bargaining game. This is again based on a well-established exercise. We've adapted it for use in this context, and we hope that you see things that are useful and instructive to you. So there's just 15 seconds left. The countdown is now going. I apologize for the background noise if you hear it. So that's the end of round 2, and let's get the scores. It looks like some of you have gained money, some of you have lost money, where some of you are working together and some of you are working against each other in a variety of ways. But let's go to round 3. I'm going to start the clock ticking on round 3. Round 3, I'm actually going to change the rules of the game in one key way, which is it's a bonus round. So everything in this round is times 3. So you could win or lose. Instead of 100,000, it's 300. Instead of 200,000, it's 600. Instead of 300,000, it's 900. And you also now have just 3.5 minutes to communicate. The communications is now open, so you can send private messages to other teams in your cluster or messages to everybody. And you can all communicate however you choose, but it's up to you. In the end, the vote is still just by you and your teammates. And then, of course, we'll see what the final results are. But you have 3 minutes left to use this time to communicate your messages, whatever they are. As I said, the communications is precious. If you want to exchange phone numbers, you can choose to do so. You can then talk more freely about this. But either way, you have the message board and you have basically just over 2.5 minutes to do your communications. We'll give you some more Jeopardy music. And so the clock is now ticking. There's just over 2 minutes left. We gave you a little bit of extra time to use it for your communications. This is round 3. I'll tell you in advance, round 4 is back to regular scoring, either 100, 200, or 300 hypothetical dollars. But round 3 is a bonus round. It's times 3. And for the first time, you can communicate with others. We'll be interested to see if that has an effect. But for now, use this time, think carefully about the rules of the game. Look at the payoff structure. Look at what about the rules you want to understand in order to play this game to its best effect. And there's now 1.5 minutes left in round 3. We have now just a little over a minute left. I'm hoping that you're using as much communications time as you can because you've got now, instead of just 1 or 2 partners, there's between 8 and 12 of you in a cluster, all of whom have the chance to communicate. And so this is a chance to use your bargaining skills remotely through messages on a very simple thing. Should people vote open or strong? Think about the payoff structure and think about how that might influence the kinds of messages that you send. We're in the home stretch, just 30 seconds left in round 3. So 20 seconds. You and your teammates should have resolved on what it is that you will do. Of course, you can be using the private communications to do that. Just 5 seconds left. So we're going to score round 3. And needless to say, we have quite an interesting and diverse set of scores coming in. We're going to move on to round 4. I'm going to start round 4, and I'll tell you in advance that the timing is tight. You have just 2 minutes. It's a regular round. There's no bonus to figure out how you want to score for round 4. In fact, you have just about 1 minute and 45 seconds left. You can communicate with your partner or with the whole cluster, however you choose, but there's not much time. We will give you a little bit of music. And we'll stop there because we're really in the home stretch. There's just 1 minute left in round 4. Round 5 could be the last round of the game. And I'll tell you in advance that I will change the rules of the game in round 5. But for now, you need to figure out your vote in round 4 and think about the rules of the game. We'll come back to that in the end, but you just have now 45 seconds to vote for round 4. And there's just 20 seconds left. So the clock is ticking, but you and your teammates should have decided now on what your vote is for round 4. And we will, in a minute, take a look at your scores. You get a chance to see whether you won or lost money based on what the others have done and what you've done. That marks the end of round 4. I'm going to start round 5 now. You have just 4 minutes. And of course, you can communicate with yourself and your team or with other teams or with the entire group, the cluster. But the point is, this is probably the last round. I will say I reserve the right to play a round 6, but most likely it's the last round. But here's the key thing. The rules are changing to be a bonus times 5. So instead of 100,000, it's 500,000. Instead of 200,000, it's $1 million. Instead of 300,000, it's $1.5 million that you could win or lose. So there's a lot at stake. And of course, you've now had some back and forth communications with the other team. So this is your chance to leverage that communications to your best effect. And of course, you only have 3 minutes in which to discuss what you think you should do and what you think others should do in this potentially the final round of the game. Needless to say, this is about communication and coordination, and it's on you to use this time to your best advantage. You have just over 2.5 minutes left for the communications, and let's see what you can do, knowing the rules of the game, knowing what it is that you think everyone should do, how well can you communicate that to others? So we're in the final 2 minutes. We'll give you one last taste of Jeopardy music. And there we go. 1.5 minutes left. This is your last chance to do your communications, and then we'll be interested to see the results. So at this point, we have just a minute and a few minutes left, a few seconds left. So this is your final chance. And then, of course, individually, you'll all vote as teams. If you're communicating by phone, then you're all talking to each other, I'm sure. Otherwise, it's chat. It's using the messages. 1 minute left. We're in the countdown. So just 45 seconds. You use whatever skills of communication and negotiation that you can. See what you can learn and understand about the rules of the game, as we've been now playing 5 rounds, and we'll try to make some sense of all of this. So there's just 15 seconds left. Two seconds, 1. And here's the final score. This is your chance to see what you did and what the others did. And it looks like we've got a lot of variation. What I'd like to do is, in a minute, I'm going to share with you results from the different groups. But before we do, I'd like to just make some sense of what you just went through. So I'm going to ask Susan, Nick, and John to keep an eye on the chat or the Q&A. The first question that I want to ask is, at the very first round, you had the rules of the game. Many of you voted strong. What would be the logic for a strong vote? Does anyone want to put a note in chat to say what a strong vote would represent? And if we don't have a vote, I'm mindful of time, so I'll just point out that I suspect some of you were aware. I see now a note just came in. The strong vote, the odds favor the strong vote. That is 3 out of 5 times the strong vote wins, and only 1 out of 5 times does a strong vote lose. So staying with the chat, why would anyone vote open? What would be the logic of an open vote? And clearly, you're sending a signal. A number of you said that an open vote means everyone wins. You're trying to communicate that. Well, let's take a look at what actually happened. I'm going to share my screen with the actual results from the game. You'll remember that I said that the goal of the game was to win as much as you can. What I didn't say was what you was. Is you as an individual team or you as a cluster? So if we look at the folks in game 1, in round 1, we had 2 opens and 2 strongs. That stayed for round 2. When we let you communicate with everybody, guess what? It improved in the sense that we had 3 opens who wanted to all work together, but we had 1 strong who said, no, the odds favor a strong vote. And then for rounds 4 and 5, D held solid on strong and the other 3 went open. We suspect they might have some relationship issues on their next large. But if you look at the individual scores, Team D ended up with $1.9 million. Everyone else lost money. And by the way, the total cluster score was a net of 0. If we go to Team Cluster 4, we had 2 opens and 2 strongs in the beginning, 2 opens and 2 strongs. Even with communication, we ended up with 3 strongs. And then, by the way, round 4, everyone said, forget this. And here's where we might need a therapist, because we had all 4 strongs. They did try to recoup on round 5, and we did have 3 opens. But because we had the 1 strong, their cluster ended up as a cluster losing money. So even though Team A got 1.3 million, they're part of a money losing cluster. And in a minute, we're going to ask how that could match real life. But what I'd like to do is to take a look at Team 5, where magically they had everyone voting open for the first 2 rounds. And then we had some defectors, and then things just deteriorated from there. As a cluster, they still lost money, but they couldn't maintain what was essentially a trust relationship. But let's look at 7. Again, here everyone voted open, and then we had some defections. We did get everyone to vote open in round 4, but in fact, that didn't hold when the stakes went up. These are just some of the examples. We could go into more of them, but here's what I want to talk about in the few minutes that we have. And we can use the chat to do this. This was, of course, a very simple hypothetical game. It's actually a prisoner's dilemma game, and some of you may have recognized, but a 4-party game instead of a 2. My question for you is, this is a game that gave you an incentive to, as somebody said in the chat, to lie or to pursue self-interest. Are there any games like this in real life when it comes to large-scale science and engineering projects? Are there any incentives for people to pursue self-interest rather than the interest of the whole, to essentially play my team wins versus my cluster wins? Can anyone think of any parallels in a research enterprise that emulate what we did in this game? And you can put them in chat, but I'll give you some thought starters. One example, of course, is in budget setting. Another is in promotion and tenure rules, so we see that. Another is getting patents, getting credibility, getting listings for publications. We had a whole session on sharing data, where individually there are costs, but collectively there are benefits. There are lots of versions of this on any multi-site team where different sites have incentives to pursue self-interest. And we even have a comment about getting results. And so here's the point. The goal of this exercise is to open up discussion within a team around how do you navigate competition where the rules of the game have incentives to pursue self-interest. But one final question that I'm going to ask you. All of you suffered in trying to get everyone to vote open, even when you had messages for people to vote open. In fact, let's do the second poll if we could, Menon. So a quick question. Can any of you think of any ways that you could persuade anybody to get everyone to vote open? The first one is, was it not honored? And of course, the answer is that a number of you had agreements that, I'm going to stop it here just because of time. A number of you had agreements to vote open that were not honored. Let's go to the second poll. Did any of you have agreements that were honored? And quite a few of you said yes, that you did get everybody to vote open, which is fantastic. Does anyone want to share anything that they did in the chat that was key to doing that? And we're almost at time. So a number of you had no agreements. A number of you tried to persuade each other to vote open, and it worked sometimes. What I'm going to suggest is that two things. One, you can do what Ronald Reagan called trust but verify. You could have put yourself on screen shares with phones and looked at what everyone voted, or you could have reached a sidebar agreement to take whatever the results were and divide by 4, and you can see that, in fact, there was an incentive then for everyone to vote open. But here's the key thing. The rules of the game gave you incentives to pursue self-interest, the winning strategy wasn't just to try to be the one to win. The winning strategy is to change the rules of the game, to divide the sum by 4, to provide other mechanisms so that in a sense you can create a game where the incentives are to collaborate rather than to pursue narrow self-interest. Needless to say, this was a quick exercise. It was a chance to take a look at a way of building collaboration and teamwork on your team. And so if you're interested to then use this in real life with the team, email me and we can make it available with you. We're at time, so I'm just going to mention that you had a number of things to say about workforce development. I'm not going to go into them in detail, but in fact, you were quite visible about the important work that's needed in this space. And with that, I'm going to turn it to John for the look ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say is that next week is the final session. We're going to talk about collaboration across fields and disciplines. We're also going to talk about the leap to large and how it applies to smalls and mediums.
Super.
So thanks for the attendance today, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you and take care all.